Hello everybody, this is Austin Gundry, and today we're going to explore the question how the British East India Company took over an entire subcontinent, namely that of India. To start this off, we'll be going back to the roots of the British East India Company. The British East India Company, originally called the Governor and Company of Merchants of London trading with the East Indies, was started in December of 1600 when George Earl of Cumberland and a group of over 200 merchants obtained a royal charter from Queen Elizabeth I. This charter gave them a monopoly on British trade to all countries east of the Cape of Good Hope, South Africa, and west of the Strait of Magellan, South America. When the British East India Company first got to India, they found it under control of the Mughal Empire. They also found companies set up similar to their own, including the Portuguese Estado da India and the Dutch United East India Company. These were rivals and would regularly engage in skirmishes with each other. One major one occurred in 1612 when the British defeated a Portuguese fleet at the Battle of Swally. With this victory, they considered expanding more into India, and so they convinced England to send an ambassador, Sir Thomas Roe, to visit the Mughal Emperor to discuss this. This was a grand success, and the Emperor reacted very favorably to British trade. With the trust of the Mughal Emperor, the British started expanding, slowly at first, but they quickened as time went on. The areas you see in pink represent those directly controlled by the British East India Company. Between the years 1765 and 1857, they expanded rapidly, as you can see, controlling most of India by that point, with almost all the areas in yellow being in subsidiary alliances with them. Effectively, the British East India Company had taken over all of India. You might wonder how a company with such small beginnings took over such a large and populous place. One key component happened between the years 1660 and 1670 when King Charles II passed a series of 5 laws that gave the East India Company increased power, including the ability to acquire territory, to mint money, to command fortresses and troops, make war and peace, and exercise civil and criminal jurisdiction over the areas they had acquired. In effect, this gave them total reign over India. With this power, the East India Company used 2 main methods to take over, the first being the might of their army and outright annexation. It is estimated that at its height, the East India Company's military, called the Presidency Armies, employed over 2,500 men, most of these being native Indians, but also some Europeans. These were separated into 3 sub-armies, the Army of Bombay, Bengal, and Madras. The East India Company also had a sizable navy, some of whose vessels would later on go to join Her Majesty's Navy of England. The second method the British East India Company used to take over was through forming subsidiary alliances with the different Indian rulers. Under these alliances, the Indian rulers had to accept a number of regulations, such as they had to accept British troops into their territory and pay for their maintenance. They could not enter into any other alliance or declare war without British permission, and they would acknowledge the East India Company as principal power in India. In return, the East India Company offered them protection. This was a very one-sided deal, but to the rulers whose lands had been ravaged by the wars of the Maratha and Mughal empires, it was a way out. Eventually, though, like all great powers do, the British East India Company fell, their downfall coming after the Indian Rebellion of 1857, in which a large part of the Bengal Presidency Army revolted. After the loss of nearly 100,000 lives, the East India Company put down the rebellion, but not before England, sensing the tyrannical way in which the East India Company was ruling, decided to step in. The British East India Company was dissolved, and India was placed under British rule. Speaking of the legacy of the British East India Company, an article published in the April 1873 version of the British Times stated, "It accomplished a work such as in the whole history of the human race no other trading company ever attempted, and such as none surely is likely to attempt in the years to come." It is my hope that the last part of that statement is true.